to introduce now Tricia Reynolds, who is from Swire.
Oh, do you know what?
I'm running older there. I'm forgetting who I'm working with. Do you want to go? All right, okay, we will, Tricia. Yes, why not? Let's be spontaneous.
Try follow that.
We've got Tricia from Val, and she's going to speak about some of the research that they've been doing into this area.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to come to your event and to present some of the stuff that Val's actually been doing. So I'm Tricia Reynolds and I'm a policy officer at Voluntary Action Leicestershire, and I lead on children, young people and families work, so supporting voluntary and community sector groups to try and influence policy around that particular area. So just in case you don't know what Voluntary Action Leicestershire do, we are an infrastructure organisation for the voluntary and community sector for Leicester City and Leicestershire. And some of the work we do includes supporting 3,500 voluntary sector groups that cover all areas of life and service delivery. So that's 1,000 in Leicester City and 2,500 in Leicestershire. And on average, Val have approximately 10,000 volunteering inquiries each year. So people that want to come and volunteer in a variety of ways come and inquire about that through Voluntary Action Leicestershire. So what do we know? We know that the cuts to public services are more likely to have the biggest impact on women of all ages because they are more likely to use them more than men. Examples of cuts likely to be felt by women include tax credits and housing benefits being capped and child benefit being means tested. Changes to the welfare system have more chance of these affecting women because they are more likely to apply for tax credits, housing benefit and child benefit, whether part of a two-parent family or lone parent. We know that tax credits have been capped and some families have lost out because of it. Understanding and awareness of the changes to the benefits regime is clearly something which women need more information and advice on in order to prepare for any detrimental changes to the circumstances. Child poverty reduced dramatically between 1998 and 2011, when 1.1 million children were lifted out of poverty. This reduction is credited in large part to measures that increase the levels of lone parents working, as well as real and often significant increases in the level of benefits paid to families with children that went into the job market. The increasing rise on everyday living expenses, including fuel, food and transport costs, are obvious examples of escalating day-to-day costs for many families. This has a direct impact on women that are in and out of work, particularly lone parents, many of whom are women. The desire to get back to work as a single mother is great, and for the past 10 to 15 years, women have been supported to get back into the workplace through government initiatives and support programmes through the DWP, as well as voluntary and community sector organisations. Lone parents are a group with particular needs. They are proportionately a larger percentage of the population in Leicester than in England and Wales as a whole, according to the area profile of Leicester City 2009. Leicester City's voluntary sector as a whole has taken its share of cuts. For example, groups as diverse, sorry, I can't get that word, as the Anjani Women and Girls Centre, Leicester Rape Crisis and Relate Leicester have been affected as part of a 0 to 19 strategic review of children and young people's services. So how do voluntary groups help? The voluntary and community sector are often the first point of call for women for advice and guidance because they are often more approachable than statutory services. They are based in community networks or seem less official and daunting. Services such as benefit advice, childcare, parenting support, after-school provision and specialist provision for different cultures that women access is not an exhaustive list, but the key message here is that VCS groups provide a number of services that women are likely to rely on. In Leicester, the 0 to 19 strategic review of children's services across the city will have an impact on these services and the women who use them. In particular, services that provide after-school care, after-school activities and specialist services for children and young people, which attract a multitude of different cultures. For example, services that enable women to go on training and further education courses to build confidence, aspiration and their skill set to get them back into the job market are all affected. According to research carried out by the False Economy website, which was based on 264 Freedom of Information responses from local councils across England, it calls into question whether the government's commitment to the big society, launched with great fanfare a year ago, is really just camouflage for the cuts. Although ministers enthuse about the idea that charities and voluntary organisations could take over public services, there is increasing evidence that such groups are facing deep funding cuts. However, local authorities have been faced with a mammoth task, deciding how the cut in funding is relayed down to direct delivery services, both internally and externally. Funding for children and young people provision across Leicester has taken a considerable hit. We know it's hard, and we know that somewhere along the line, the voluntary and community sector have had to take some of the largest cuts, particularly in children's services. So how is the voluntary sector affected? With more and more cuts to services, women are looking to the voluntary and community sector to provide advice, guidance and support. Many voluntary groups provide services for women in crisis, and these are in higher demand in recent years due to the overall economic situation. Other services affected include after-school provision and childcare, as well as being able to access training and educational opportunities. There are reduced funding streams from a variety of sources. 49% of groups responding to Voluntary Action Leicestershire survey said that they had experienced a cut in funding from all sources, and 20% said that they were expecting a cut in the future. There remains strong competition for the voluntary and community sector to compete for reduced resources, and this is not ideal. So how can we reduce the impact of the cuts? Well, we know that funding for many services has been affected by recent government cuts to local authorities and is having an impact on all services and provision in the voluntary sector, as well as for local authorities themselves. Women seeking to access services is putting more pressure on voluntary and community sector groups. Organisations are working hard to mitigate the effects of reduced funding, but that level of work is not sustainable for any length of time. For instance, the amount of time that people are now working. We know that groups and organisations are reducing staff levels and trying to deliver almost the same level of work whilst keeping the quality of what they deliver on track. We know that groups are realigning themselves to offer new services that match funding criteria to be in with a chance of existing. Groups are working to compete for service contracts and small grants in an increasingly competitive market. This is a time-consuming process with no guarantee of success at the end of it, and likewise funding is often limited to 1 or 2 years, so groups sometimes struggle to show a long-term impact. We know that there are talks between organisations that are looking to merge to be able to sustain their services and organisations. However much groups and organisations are against it, some are looking to charge for some of their services to maintain themselves as well as developing trading opportunities. So what are Voluntary Action Leicestershire doing? More generically, but including women's groups, we're sharing the impact of the work the voluntary and community sector are doing through information on the VAL website, promoting opportunities to groups through forums and e-briefings. We have and continue to represent groups that are under threat of cuts and attend high-level strategic meetings to represent the sector as a whole, as well as support voluntary and community sector representatives to feed back to the sector. We are supporting groups to identify potential funding sources through the group support team at Voluntary Action Leicestershire. And we consistently try to influence policy at a local level by bringing groups together and forming joint consultation responses. We work with groups that are considering restructuring and support them through the process, offering advice and guidance. We help groups to source volunteers to help in their organisation, help with volunteering issues, as well as run a volunteering network for managers of volunteers. And we work hard to inform the sector of upcoming issues that could affect them, as well as development opportunities, and we do that on a regular basis through a variety of mechanisms. And that's me. Thank you, Tricia. Some quite damning statistics in that presentation there, which at the end we'll be able to ask questions and have discussion about things that we've heard.